Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and it's that time again. We've got ourselves a cheap GPU, but the fans are knackered, so let's try and sort them out. Keep watching to find out how. Okay, so in this video we're going to be taking our Radeon R9 380X apart and hopefully restoring the bearings to their former glory. Now, this card was actually a suggestion from somebody on our Discord server. I'm not sure whether it was Glenn or maybe it was Seam at Night, I can't remember which one, but one of them is definitely to blame. Now, this GPU is the R9 380X 4GB version, and this was on sale. Actually, there was a bunch of them for sale, which myself and a few other YouTubers actually all bought, so you may see similar videos to this coming out in the coming days or weeks. But we all got involved. They were £20 each. So for an R9 380X 4GB card, which actually is still quite a capable card for 1080p gaming, £20 is not a lot of money. But the downside is, the listing said the fans weren't great, they were quite noisy. Now, I'm not sure whether you're going to be able to pick this up on the microphone, but we'll do our best. So this fan is absolutely fine, spins freely. I've tested it out in the PC, no problems whatsoever. But this fan is pretty bad. And hopefully you're picking that up. You can hear it's not great, and actually the fan itself, there's a little bit of movement on the axis, slightly more than the other one. So what we're going to do is we're going to strip the card down, give it a good clean, give it a new helping of thermal paste, courtesy of Arctic MX4, and also we're going to put some oil into the fan bearing to hopefully make it sound a lot better and perform a lot better. Now, before we go ahead and do all that, I'm going to go through some of the greases and lubricants I've got here, and I'm going to suggest which are good ones to use and which ones you should probably try and avoid. Now, the ones you should try and use, ideally for this kind of setup, is like a sewing machine oil, something like that. Now, I've been really lucky, if I can find it somewhere. Oh, there it is. Now, I've got a set of hair clippers from Warner, which actually you can check the review, which is up over here. And it actually comes with some kind of sewing machine oil, which is the kind of thing you put into clippers and hair trimmers and that sort of thing to lubricate lubricate the blades. So this actually is perfect for our usage. So all we're going to need is a couple of drops just to get into that bearing and lubricate it a little bit. Now, ideally you want to try and avoid anything which is like a heavy grease or something like WD-40. WD-40 essentially is for removing moisture, and although initially it will work because there is a lubricating property to it, WD-40 will quite quickly dry out, and especially underneath the kind of high temperatures that we're going to be expecting from this graphics card. So WD-40, if you're in an absolute emergency and you need to use something, you can go ahead and use it. And again, same with these kind of things, the maintenance sprays, they're all work in a very similar way. Also, they do contain kind of spirits and also propellants, which aren't great and will gradually degrade the plastics of the fan and the actual bearing hub itself. Some of these will actually make the plastic swell, which again will make it so it's even tighter on the spindle, and it's going to stop the fan spinning altogether. Now, another option which you can use is something like white grease, which is a kind of like a food safe grade grease, which you can use on a lot of things like roller bearings and that sort of thing. This was something I did consider, and if I don't get the kind of performance I want from the oil, then the white grease might be a little bit better because it's slightly thicker and will help pack out any looseness in the bearing. So that's the lubricants talked about. We've got some compressed air to blow out some of the dust that's on the cooler, and we're going to replace the cooling paste, all that kind of stuff. So best thing to do is get straight in and start taking it apart. First thing to do is to remove the plastic shroud, the fan shroud. And generally on these, most of them are 4 screws, 2 each side. So there we go, it's quite a nice metal shroud actually on this one, so put that to one side. So now we've got full access to the fans themselves. Now, most fans are generally connected with either 2 or 3 screws connecting the actual fans themselves to the cooler. So we'll go ahead now and take those off as well. Now, ideally when you're doing this, if you can, it's a good idea if you've got one to use some kind of anti-static mat. If you haven't got that available, then a non-conductive surface is ideal. Something like a graphics card box, or maybe a motherboard box, something along those lines is a good idea. Or if you're really struggling to find something, then No doubt some of you have got a pizza box lying around somewhere, so you could use that. This table I've cleaned and is relatively static free, relatively so. But again, this is only a £20 graphics card, so it's not the end of the world. Obviously, if you're doing this on a more expensive model, then do take precautions. Now, I have actually looked at this already, and on Alibaba or AliExpress, one of the two, we can actually get replacements of these fans with the wiring for around about £9, but it's going to take about 30 to 40 days shipping. So rather than wait that long, and hopefully we can repair this and it'll actually be okay without having to spend any money at all, with just a little bit of time, a little bit of TLC, and hopefully we can get this working again. Now, most of the time these are kind of wired into the graphics card, and there's a route of cabling. This one's a little bit more tricky to get out. So what we'll do is we'll take off the rest of the cooling assembly. We can then actually use a brush. As you can see, this is pretty filthy. So what we're going to do is use just a paintbrush. And what we can do is gently agitate it, and you can see that dust coming straight off of there. Now, if you want to, you can use something like an air duster. You could take it outside, use an air duster, that kind of thing. I'm not going to do that in this particular case because we don't want to go too overboard. Just want to remove most of the dust. Because for all we know at the moment, this may not work at all, and it may be horrendous, and we might have to wait, so we might have to take it all apart again. But I think we've got most of the dust out of there. In fact, actually, it isn't too bad at all. Now, of course, you could go completely to town to this, take the whole thing off, clean it in the sink with soap and water and all that stuff, and leave it out to dry. But for the purpose of this video, we're not going to bother doing that. So let's remove the rest of the cooling assembly. So again, most of these are just 4 screws to remove the back plate. And there we go. Now you see already the paste on this is, it looks like it may have been reapplied. It's quite thick and gloopy, and actually they've made quite a mess of that. It's gone all over the rest of the CPU, so we'll get rid of that. So we've disconnected the fan, so we've got the card separate. So now again we can go through and brush some of that off and get a cloth or a microfiber and try and get rid of some of this paste. Now, some of you are going to go crazy for me doing this, but there is a lot of paste on here which is on the side, so we're going to carefully use a screwdriver and try and scrape some of that off, because that is pretty crusty on there. And as you can see, there's literally chunks of this stuff coming off. And this is actually like cement. This is pretty bad. There we go. We're getting really big chunks off. So I think what's happened is the previous user has actually tried to improve the thermals by putting some fresh paste on, but have probably not removed the old stuff, which is not a great idea. And this is on pretty well. Now you want to be quite careful when you're doing this, because you don't want to damage any of the surface mounted capacitors. But look at that, we're getting some serious chunks off of this thing. Now really what would have been a better solution for this would be to probably get some rubbing alcohol or something along those lines to actually try and dissolve some of this. So we'll just try and remove as much of this as we can. most of the heat build-up is going to be from the actual CPU or GPU itself, rather than the surrounding components. I'll try and be a bit careful and get rid of some of this crap without damaging the components. Okay, so that is much better. We've got a pretty clear shot there of the GPU die. And there's a little bit of reflection on it. There's still a little bit of a build-up along this edge here, just along there. But I think that's going to be good enough. So what we do now is just we can remove any of the loose dust. Again, just using the paintbrush. Again, paintbrushes have got bristles which are made of generally kind of nylon or some other material like that. So this again isn't the ideal solution, but it does do the job. I'm sure somebody will comment in the section below of what I should have been using. But at least a paintbrush is the sort of thing that most DIYers are going to have around at home somewhere. We get rid of some more of that paste which is around the GPU die. So we're looking pretty clean right there. I'm not going to bother taking the back plate off. Looking in between there, actually doesn't look too dirty at all, but what I might do is give it a quick blast with the air duster. And we'll give the other side a quick blast. There we go, that's looking much, much better. So that's that part of it done. So now we can go ahead and clean up the cooler. And we'll take these fans off. So again, the cooler, pretty much the same deal. This is pretty heavily encrusted. Now you can go a little bit more aggressively on this because it's just the copper heatsink. Ideally, you don't want to scratch the raised section of the copper that makes contact with the actual GPU itself. So we'll try and get rid of some of that. That's actually quite loose on there, so that's not too bad at all. Again, it's probably been repasted very, very recently. Now at this point, if you wanted to go really, really overboard, you could actually get some sanding equipment out and actually really polish that down and get it as completely flat and smooth. Again, it's a £20 card, so we're not going to go crazy on it. But that is actually much, much better and much cleaner. So I'm going to say that's pretty much ready. And let's give it another little blast with the air duster, just to get rid of any loose bits. I can see there's a bit in there. Looks like Nito's going to have a bit of work cut out for him tomorrow. Yeah, I think that'll do the job. So there we go, that is the equipment all dusted. So we can get rid of some of this now. Actually, it's probably a good idea if you can do this on a tray or something, but again, it's not the end of the world. So now we're going to take a look at the fans. So these are the fans that have come off, and you can see that I'm going to drop them. It's not very easy to spin them actually, but actually that one hasn't got too much play in it. Yeah, actually they're not that bad. So what we need to do is, obviously we can clean the fans up a little bit if necessary, but what we want to do is we want to remove these labels on the back of the fan, and underneath there's going to be a bung which we can remove, and then we can put some oil into them. So best thing to do is get yourself a sharp instrument like a knife or something. You can use your nails if you want to, just remove these stickers. Now ideally you want to replace the stickers after, so the adhesive that's on them, you want to try not to get too dirty if you can possibly help it. Now again, when you're using a screwdriver or anything, there may be actually contacts or metal bits where the wires are soldered onto at the bottom, so if at all possible, you want to be a bit careful in case you remove any of those surface mounted capacitors. So there we go, there's the sticker off. And we can see underneath there was actually a surface mounted chip there, which is probably for the RPM control and various other things. So like I said, do be careful. Now possibly this has been tampered with before, because we can see that the bearing section is actually open. There isn't a rubber bung in there. So we'll do the other side and just see if that's the same as well. That sticker which was actually quite easy to get off, so it may be that someone has actually had a go at doing this already. This one seems to be stuck a little bit better, so maybe this one hasn't been touched. Now, feeling by it, the actual adhesive on here is pretty much useless, so we might have to find some kind of other means of attaching that, because there's virtually no adhesive left in that whatsoever. And as you can see, similar sort of deal, so we've got the speed controller chips and what have you in the ICs there, and the bearing section is completely open, so there's no rubber bungs in there. Sometimes if there's a rubber bung in there, you just need to get the screwdriver in and just prise it out. So we've got the bearings open, now time to put some oil into them. Right, okay, so we've got our two fans now, so all we need to do is add a drop of oil. Now, like I said before, you can possibly use things like that, like white grease. I would avoid WD-40, that kind of thing. Now this is essentially a metal oil or a machine oil. So what we're going to do is just put a couple of small drops in the bearing hole. And you can almost watch it being sort of sucked into the bearing if it's quite dry. Try not to get oil elsewhere if you can possibly help it, unlike me. We'll just put a dab on there. Try and remove any overspill. Actually quite difficult to hold this and spin it. You could spin it a little bit just to see if your work's done any good at all. Yeah, that feels quite free. I think that's the one with more play in it. So we'll put another drop in there just to be on the safe side. Don't put too much oil in, because some oils can be electrically conductive, which is obviously not a great thing to do if it's inside a PC. Now really what we need to do now is to try and seal this up in some way. So these stickers I think are going to be pretty much useless. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a small piece of electrical tape cut into like a square, and we're going to put that over the top. Just going to have to go and find some electrical tape. Okay, so we've got some black electrical tape. This is going to be absolutely fine. And all we're going to need to do is just cut a couple of squares. So just enough to cover the actual bearing hole. Yeah. It's not the greatest look, but as long as it seals the bearing section, that is going to be absolutely fine. So what we're left with is the bearings sealed by the black tape. So if there is any oil in there which is trying to escape, then it's not going to, or at least that's the theory. So next thing to do is to apply some fresh paste to the GPU. So we're going to be using the Arctic MX4. Just a blob of that will be fine. Whatever method you choose now is entirely up to you to kind of distribute the paste. I personally I'm a big fan of using my finger and just patting it around the outside edges, but I know a lot of you get triggered from doing that, so I might actually stop recording now and do it, or you can just use the kind of the spreader method. If you've got a credit card, which I'm looking around for, or something similar, you can use something like that just to spread it across. Realistically, it couldn't be much worse than what was on there. So with compression now, when the copper cooler sits on there, it's actually going to be squashing it down. So because of the pressure, any excess paste will be pushed to the sides, and that should, in theory, close up any of those tiny little gaps that have been created by me tapping it with my finger. Again, everyone's going to have their own opinion on how to do this. I've been doing this for a long time, since kind of like the mid-90s, and I haven't had a failure yet, so Yes, it may not be the best way of doing it, but it works for me, so that's what I'm doing. And I don't have a spreader or a credit card handy, so there you go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to reattach the fans to the cooler, and then we're going to put the cooler back onto the GPU. So there's the fans in position pretty much, and looking at the cooler, it goes on like that, and the actual connection to the graphics card is in this top corner, so the cables have actually pretty much gone their own way. So now we need to reattach the case screws, sorry, the fan screws. And this is actually probably the hardest bit of the whole job, getting it all to line back up again. A magnetic screwdriver at this point is actually really useful. And with these fans, on most graphics cards, you'll find that the actual lugs that the cooler attaches to are normally slightly raised, so it just pops into position when you get the tension on them. I would suggest as well putting the screws in, doing it a little bit at a time. Don't fully tighten the screws first time. Get them all in first, and then you can go around and do a second pass, and then that will make the job a little bit easier. So we've done all three now. So now we go ahead and just do that final little cinch just to make sure that they're secure. Now the problem with this fan setup is the fact that the blades have a slight curve to them, so it actually blocks the screw to some extent. So there is some amount of manual dexterity required, but normally once you get the first screw in, it's absolutely fine. Now some of you are probably thinking this is actually a lot of time and effort to go to for what is a £20 card, and it's actually not even a particularly fast card anyway. It actually, speed-wise, it probably gets eclipsed by a GTX 970, which in itself is another quite inexpensive card, and not a particularly high-performing one. But the theory is, for £20, I think this is probably worth a punt. You can actually overclock these cards a little bit as well, so to get a little bit of extra performance out of them. And again, for £20, you can't even buy a GeForce GTX 1070 these days on Amazon, which is a horrendous graphics card, which most onboard graphics are actually better than. So this is actually going to be a pretty decent experiment. If it works, for the sake of £20 and a drop of oil and 20 minutes, half an hour's worth of time to actually fix it, it's actually not that bad a deal. Right, so we'll give that a final wipe just to make sure there's no contaminants on there, which there probably is because this desk is pretty filthy. Now at this point, it's actually a good idea to plug in the GPU fan connector whilst you can still get access to it easily. And also making sure it's in nice and firmly just so you don't get any electrical issues. So once we've done that, then you can line up the cooler with the card. This is actually not the easiest of things to do with it in this orientation. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to put that down, and then I'm going to lay the card actually flat onto it. So looking through the actual holes in the top of the card, you can pretty much see where you're aiming for and get it pretty much spot on first time, which that actually isn't too bad at all. So with this, because of it's like a CPU fan, you can put the screws in ready, but what you want to do is actually try and do up the screws in a crisscross pattern, do it gradually so you get a good even coverage and a good even kind of torque, I suppose would be the right word. So a couple of screws just to get it started, and again, like I said, do it in a crisscross pattern. Again, these things don't have to be too precise. It's not a Formula 1 car. And don't over tighten the screws either, that's generally a bad idea. Once they've got to their final place, you don't need to give them much extra tweaking. So there we go, that is everything back together. And actually the fan already seems a little bit quieter. There's still a little bit of a noise there, but it's actually going. So they're both similar. That one's still quite noisy, but hopefully in time, as the oil gets into the bearing, it should become much better. Again, if it doesn't, then we can always take it apart and put in some other oil. That goes around that way. Schoolboy error. And again, reassembly is just the reverse of taking it apart. So it's just 4 screws to get lined up. And you can start the screws off wherever you choose. Doesn't really make a great deal of difference, just making sure that your GPU, actually the fans aren't being obstructed by the fan shroud. So that's one side done. Don't you just love the sound of PCB scraping along a desk? So there we go. There's our graphics card, all put back together, and both fans pretty much sound quite similar. This one I think is possibly gone past the point of kind of no return. Doesn't sound too bad though, and it's now the spring of the magnet has come back a bit. Yeah, that feels much better. There is still a bit of a notch there. Like I said, hopefully over time that will get much better. It's actually spinning quite freely. You can see both of them pretty much stopping at the same time. So the last thing to do, now we've done this, is to put it back in the computer and make sure it all works and put the fans on and see what they're like. So I'm going to put this back in the PC and then we'll be right back. Okay, so we've got the graphics card reinstalled in the computer, which is behind me. And actually it's looking quite good so far. So just on boot up, we've just idled in. The GPU is at 38 degrees, which is pretty much understandable. Most graphics cards will be around about that sort of temperature. So what I'm going to do now is go into the AMD Wattman software and the global settings, and I'm going to ramp the fans up to 100% and we'll hear what they're like. So in Wattman we can scroll down. If we go down to fan speed, currently we're set to automatic. So we'll turn it up to full speed and see what happens. And there we go, that's on full speed. Now hopefully you can pick it up from the microphone that I'm wearing. I'm actually less than, what, 2 feet away from that. And actually that doesn't sound that bad considering it's a fan on full load. So I'll set it back to auto. So what we'll do is now if we go into a game. Okay, so we've got some Battlefield 5 running, and at the moment it's just in the game, we're not really doing a great deal. So if we do some moving around, and it seems the graphics card has still got a bit of noise to it. There is actually some coil whine as well, which I'm noticing. But the game actually seems to be running okay. It'll be interesting to see what the temperatures turn out like at the end of this actually. And it's certainly not as bad as it was, it's much better. And actually, as we're running the game, it actually seems like it's reducing. I don't know, do you agree with that, Kath? No? Kath doesn't agree. So, okay, yeah, it's not been a complete win on there. Maybe what we could do is take the fans out and actually get rid of any slight burrs which are in there. There is actually some kind of notchiness you can feel in the fans themselves, so maybe at some point we'll take them out and give that another go. Or alternatively, we'll just place an order for some new fans, but it was definitely worth a go. It was definitely worth getting rid of some of that horrible paste that was on there, which was definitely not doing any good. And we'll actually Alt and Tab out of this now and see what the temperatures we're getting to. So temperature wise, so we maxed out on the GPU, it's 67 degrees, which actually is still not too bad. I think 67 degrees on this kind of GPU, granted it's quite a good airflow case, and at the moment we've got the side panel off, but we've got ambient temperature in here at the moment of around about 22, 23 degrees, possibly slightly more. It is quite warm in the UK at the moment, so actually that's not a bad temperature, 67 degrees. I'm actually quite impressed with the coolness of it, not so impressed with the noise. So maybe we'll have to order some fans and we'll revisit this at a later date. So anyway, there was our attempt and subsequent failure in making these fans a lot silenter, if that's even a word, more quiet. I've been Mike, this is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To. If you've got any comments or questions or suggestions, feel free to put them in the comments section below. But that's all for now, and we'll catch you in the next video. Thanks for watching.